Hi, Tony from All the Remote Things back with you again. And I've got Ali Walker with me today. Fantastic to have you, Ali.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's great to see you.
So I think for our viewers, this is going to be a really great one. And please, if you've got any, questions or comments, don't forget to drop them in the comments in the show notes for us afterwards. And we're going to get into a number of things around empathy and connection types and that kind of information. But before we do that, Ali, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you. So, I actually started my career as a criminal lawyer, which I guess sounds like a little bit of left field, but I think it's not too much of a distant jump that I just developed this fascination for human behavior. I think all criminal lawyers probably at their heart have an interest in human behavior. I realized that I wanted to pursue that more than I wanted to stay in the law. So I ended up doing a PhD in group dynamics. And through that research, I started developing some models of how we all connect very differently and how we experience belonging very differently. And that led to me writing books, teaching at university. I now have my own business called Ality. So it's kind of a play on my name, Ali. Um, and through that business, I consult with organizational cultures. So I've worked with hospitals, I've worked with corrective services, I've gone into jails, and on that end of the spectrum, quite toxic cultures, but I've also worked with fantastic progressive companies, multinationals, not-for-profits. Not to say that the hospitals and the jails aren't progressive, but I don't mean to put them in those categories. But what I'm trying to say is I've worked along the range of cultures, some that have quite problematic aspects to them and others that have very progressive and exciting aspects. And it's really enjoyable for me and it energizes me to work with that range and see how our relationship to work is changing so much. And that for a lot of people, their experience of human connection is really dominated by their experience of work culture. So that's what I do day to day. I also write books and I get to speak to fantastic people like you through podcasts and the like.
Yeah, it's brilliant. It's brilliant to have you on as well. So we know each other because I was privileged enough to hear you speak at Agile Australia, BC, before COVID. Um,
BC, I haven't heard that before.
yeah, and of course, then I had you on the podcast that we had running at
Yeah.
time. So it was just a natural progression. And I'm being upfront and honest. One of the reasons that I did say to you off air that I wanted to get you on here is because you've written a book. And you've written a new book. You already had a book out, which is Get Conscious, by the way. And you've got even some guided meditations and
Mm.
goes with that. So have a look at that when you get a chance. But it's the new book I'm really looking at that's really, really piqued my interest. And it's called Click or Clash.
Yes.
So yeah, talk to me about that, Ali. Talk to me about what it's all about.
So you mentioned the first book, and I think people relate more to the subtitle than the title of the first book. So the first book title is Get Conscious, but the subtitle is How to Stop Overthinking.
Okay.
And so everyone hears Get Conscious, and then I say How to Stop Overthinking, and everyone they say, Oh, I need that. But if you think about the trajectory of where my research and work went, it was really starting at the individual level. So Get Conscious is all about our internal experience. And then Click or Clash is about interpersonal relationships. So it's going from that individual level, who you are before the world intervenes, into the world of relationships. So who you are compatible with, who you connect with, how you communicate with people, the role you play in teams, your leadership style, all of those things I explore in the book. And it came out of a research study that I'd conducted based on those models of connection that I've developed. So the book is really an exploration of how all of us are very different and bring different emotional energy to relationships. Because even though all of us have relationships and we engage in relationship behaviors and connection behaviors every day of the week, I don't think that a lot of us know the science behind who we're compatible with and why. I think a lot of people just feel like they're pinballs dropped into a pinball machine, ricocheting around from person to person and not really knowing the science underneath that. So I really am excited to share it with people because I genuinely think it can change the way that we approach our relationships. And given that the quality of our relationships is the number one predictor of mental and physical health, knowing what we need from relationships can only be a good thing.
Where I see this is fantastic contextually to that, there's sort of a bit of a flip around of that too, is as you said, knowing who you click with. But it's actually the other piece of it is why you clash with certain, or you're not comfortable with certain types.
Yes. And again, that's, I think, the biggest source of probably a lot of emotional pain is having clashes with people. And so in the book, I identify 3 different types of clashes and 3 different types of click. So you can have an instant click or clash with someone. And an instant click or clash is just feeling at ease in someone's company, feeling quite relaxed. It feels familiar. You're happy to be there. You're animated and you want to stay in this person's company. Then you move into the intuitive click. Now, an intuitive click is, I want to know you better. I want to spend one-on-one time with you. I want to be your friend, or you're the coworker that I really seek out and have a good time with. So it's about the amount of time and the depth of the relationship in the intuitive click. And then we have an intimate click with someone, which is totally different from the other two. An intimate click, it may actually start off being frustration or aggravation in someone's company, but you know that they may have strengths that you don't have. You know that they smooth out your rough edges. You know that they complement your strengths. So just as we have instant, intuitive, and intimate clicks with people, we also have instant, intuitive, and intimate clashes with people as well. So the instant clash is very much a feeling of trying to, when you're trying to light a wet match. So you can stand there and all of the effort in the world and the eagerness in the world to light that match is not going to create a spark. And interestingly, with instant clashes, we generally don't take them personally. And there's no hard feelings because it's just a feeling of it being forced or awkward or unnatural in that person's company. It's like, look, I tried. I've asked some questions. This isn't really going anywhere. It feels effortful in an instant clash. So we tend to sort of say, oh, well, I tried, and then we walk away. The intuitive clash is a bit different. Intuitive clashes happen when we might think about someone who annoys us or aggravates or gets under our skin. And you might think, why are they like that? How do they sleep at night? Can you believe, it's the reason why you might pick up the phone and call someone and say, can you get a load of this? Can I just talk to you about something? That person that really gets on your nerves and gets under your skin. Now, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but an intuitive clash happens when somebody is acting out a trait of ours that we may not be comfortable with, that we may have suppressed. It doesn't mean that we have that trait in the same proportions, but it's some recognition in this person of something that we don't like about ourselves or something that we aspire to in ourselves. So you could be really irritated. I'll give you some examples because they bring this to life. So in the course of my research in interviewing people, someone said, oh, I just saw this person on Instagram posting photos of their overseas holiday. Like, don't they worry about showing off? Don't they think that they're just, and then you go deeper. Okay. And I have this process in the book that I share with people. If you have an intuitive clash with someone, and I have some questions that I ask, curious questions. And by the end of that conversation with that person, after answering those questions, this person had resolved to go and look at flights themselves because it turned out they would really love to go overseas and they would love to have an overseas holiday. So yes, it's not that that person is a show off themselves or that they're flashy or that they want people to know what they're doing. It was actually this person was triggered because they saw this person having a great time. And it just goes to show that someone can be living their life, going about their business, posting a photo on Instagram, and you never know the impact someone is going to have on you or the impact you're going to have on someone else. So my book is really about, instead of having these charged personal emotional reactions to things, to have curiosity rather than judgment that we tend to have when other people's behavior sparks us. And, that's a simple, silly example of an Instagram post, but other deeper examples could be working with someone who you think, what, every time I talk, they dismiss me. Or in fact, I was in a coaching session this morning and hearing about someone's experience of workplace bullying. So I don't want to minimize these intuitive clashes and say that if someone's doing something that you don't like, it's because of something in you. Absolutely, there are occasions where people are engaging in bad or malicious behavior that's actually against the law, right? So we need to be clear that workplace bullying, that's a crime. These things are in a different category. I'm talking about the day-to-day experiences of like, why don't I get on with that person? Or they just irritate me. So then you can use these processes. If there's something more serious, obviously they need to be escalated. But it's more the day-to-day, the pinball interactions where you might just go, oh God, that annoyed me. Or it's sometimes useful to put these conscious lenses over how we interact with others.
So above and beyond the personal slant on that, because personally that's something, in your own person, that's great. But I see also for someone like myself who's a facilitator or works with organizational constructs, or I see leaders and they're trying to build teams. And what you're talking about there, this is a great lead into that, because you actually see these interactions. You have a small amount of time when you're a facilitator to try and figure out, and so you do see those kind of interactions and wonder to yourself, okay, how do I deal with that? How do I take those people, or how do I help that team work in a better way? So
yeah. And in fact, this happened to me last week. I was facilitating a room full of leaders and I was talking about considering well-being at work and thinking about the well-being of your teams, because we know that when people are thriving, they do better work. And so as a leader, it's in your interests to think about well-being of your people. And I thought that was a pretty not very controversial thing to say. And then someone said, and he was obviously a very experienced leader, and he said, look, I've been leading for 30 years and I think that's rubbish. And because it's not my responsibility how someone lives their life outside of work. That is there, and really clear boundaries there. Now, a few years ago, I would have, if somebody in a situation when I was facilitating, if someone said, I think that's rubbish. Now, I actually really, to say I enjoy it is probably a stretch. Yeah. No, but I really welcome it. First of all, he feels psychologically safe enough in this facilitation space to tell his truth. So that's a good thing. That's positive. So it means the space is psychologically safe. There's a container there. Second thing is learn to love the resistance in a group. The resistance resembles the edges. Often the vocal resistor is saying something that people think, but they think it maybe to the 20 to 40%, whereas the vocal person thinks it 60 to 80%. So instead of overreacting to the resistor and say, oh my gosh, everyone must think like that. It's not about that. It's about saying there's a kernel of truth here in what this person is saying, and they are speaking on behalf of the group to some extent. So let's tease that out a little bit. Okay, so is that everybody else's experience? Because I don't want to go head to head with the vocal resistor in a group, and the leader should never either. This is not about me versus him. This is an idea we're exploring. Right? So it's never about the person. It's always about the group. It's always about the team, and it's always about psychological safety. And so if we always focus on the issue, not the person. So this person says, I think what you're saying is rubbish. It's not my responsibility. And I'm curious about that, because for a long time, that is how leaders have approached people at work. It is true what he is saying, and that's how he has been conditioned. So classic clash at work. There's 3 clashes I've identified at work. One's a communication clash, one's a cultural conditioning clash, and one is a working style clash. Now, this is a cultural conditioning clash because I've said the role of a leader is to care about, I didn't actually say to care about well-being, but it's important for leaders to think and consider well-being of their people. That's a cultural conditioning clash because this person for 30 years has said, hold on a second, the well-being of my staff is actually none of my business. So then I can say, all right, there's a cultural conditioning clash going on. It's not personal. This is not about him versus me. It's about an idea. Right. So as a facilitator, what's the rest of the room read on this? Let's take everyone's pulse, because something's just happened that was a bolt from the blue. That's different. You just took us in a new direction. I'm not going to be threatened by that. I'm going to be curious about it. Like, let's do this. Let's get on this roller coaster. What does everybody else think about that? And then someone said, actually, I used to think like that, but then I had an experience where XYZ, now I've come round. Perfect. All right. So now we have a bit of truth over here. We have some truth from experience over here. Let's just, you're always looking for homeostasis in the room. You're always looking to balance it out. So if you've got a vocal resistor here, it means that there's an imbalance that's been sensed here that we need to explore in the room. And I think the excitement, as a facilitator, it's an exciting time to very sensitively and gently work through some of these really triggering issues, because I was on the national radio the other day talking about workplace clashes. Oh my goodness, it can feel like walking through landmines, because everybody now there's an offense taken and people are triggered and people feel insulted. And it's almost now the feedback I'm getting from leaders is I feel like I can't say anything anymore. Yeah. I don't know if you're hearing that as well, Tony.
I see and hear that. And picking you up on that, I think there was something you just said before, and I just want to pick back up on that in terms of this, is that leaders are now expected to be able to deal with creating psychological safety, and empathy is thrown at them and said, you need to be a leader with empathy and you need to have that psychological safety. Mm-hmm. And I was really interested in your take on what empathy actually is, because I think that gets thrown at a lot of people. Yeah. And a lot of leaders, and then they don't quite know how to deal with that in terms of exactly what you're saying. Do I go left? Do I go right?
Yeah. And I'm so glad you asked about that, because empathy is the way forward, but not in the way that we've previously thought about it. And what I mean by that is there's actually a few different types of empathy. Now, the first type is what we'd all be familiar with in terms of what we've thought of empathy our whole lives. The first type is affective empathy. Now, affect in psychology is mood or emotion. So we're not talking about effective empathy that's good or right. We're talking about affective empathy. Now, affective empathy happens when I feel what you're feeling, or in the team that I take on the emotions of the people that I'm leading. Now, affective empathy is something that we can't switch off with people that we love. So if you have a child or a partner, family member walk into the room crying, immediately your emotional alarm system is going to go off a little bit. Why are we crying? What's going on? Why are we feeling like this? I need to help. I need to fix it. So that's affective empathy. Affective empathy can also be fun. You're watching a James Bond movie and he's in a car chase and you know he's going to get out of it, but you don't really know how, and your heart's racing and wow, isn't this great? This is why we watch movies and read books. We can have these safe experiences of affective empathy, or why you might cry in a movie. But let's talk about affective empathy at work. Now, that's not appropriate to bring affective empathy at work. And in fact, affective empathy at work can lead or does lead to burnout, because you're not working necessarily with your loved ones. Some people might be working with their loved ones, in which case strap yourself in because you're going to have affective empathy. Yes. But I think for many people, they don't necessarily work with their loved ones. So it's much more useful to think about the concept of cognitive empathy. Now, this is what leaders are implored to engage in. Cognitive empathy is, I see you, I respect you as a person, I respect your humanity, I want to help. How can I help? Now, just to illustrate the difference between affective and cognitive empathy, if you imagine a doctor and you go and see that doctor and you say, look, I'm just having some pain in my stomach, I can't sleep, it's keeping me up at night. Imagine the doctor said, same, me too. Now, that would be not very useful in that situation, because you don't want to hear about the doctor's gut pain. And if the doctor went on to say, I was up all night as well, you would immediately start feeling that the boundaries here are blurred. You'd start feeling uncomfortable. You don't want affective empathy from the doctor. You want cognitive empathy. Now, cognitive empathy is the most appropriate lens at work. Because when you're setting yourself up for cognitive empathy, you're also set up to help someone. Now, if your doctor or surgeon has affective empathy for you, their emotional experience is blurred with your emotional experience because there's a deeper connection going on. That's why doctors aren't allowed to treat their family members, because it's too blurred in terms of affective and cognitive empathy. When you have cognitive empathy, you are then set up for compassionate self-regulation, which is the action that then comes from cognitive empathy. So I was speaking to a CEO recently, and he said, oh, we did our company values today, and one of our values was empathy. And not to be a smart ass, but I was really interested to go into that with him, and I was explaining it's really interesting when we talk about empathy, the difference between affect and cognitive. And he went, oh, no, definitely the cognitive one. Because he was saying one of our values is we're trying to have empathy for our customers. What do they want? What do they need? How can we help? How can we serve them? That's cognitive empathy. Affective empathy is, I feel what you feel. We are in this together. And affective empathy is beautiful, and it's what we seek out it's what differentiates our loved ones from others, and our friends from strangers, because our friends are there. We know they're feeling what we're in this together. That's why also so many people, when companies started saying that through COVID, everyone was like, that grates, that doesn't feel right because you're not really in this with me. And there's the most famous tweet of COVID was, how come the airlines they weren't with me when I had oversized baggage. All the airlines are saying we're in this together, but they weren't with me 2 years ago when I had oversized baggage. Anyway, funny, but that's the difference between the two types of empathy. So if you're a leader listening to this, it's really critical that you don't feel that you need to affectively empathize with everyone you work with and take on what they're feeling. Absolutely, that boundary of cognitive empathy, but still, how can I help? The service orientation that arises from that is the most appropriate use of empathy in the working context.
So one of the other things that you shall we say, intertwine with this in thought, right? So the click and the clash and the empathy obviously all interplay together. But what I really like about you describe is the connection types, because the connection types have an interplay, the things that we've just talked about. Talk to me a little bit about how that works, Ellie.
So we all go into connection scenarios, whether it's at work or socially or one-on-one, with different, I call it emotional energy. So some people turn up and meet someone, hi, how you going? Yeah, it's big, it's animated, it's enthusiastic. Some people are quite reserved. Their body language is different. They hold back. They're more nonverbal. I became really interested in this. Why is that? And what are the connection needs behind somebody's emotional energy? So connection types reveal and identify what it's like to meet you, work with you, talk to you, be in love with you, or be in a work team with you, what it's like to be led by you. So I've developed an assessment, and I should say the book comes with the free assessment that gives you your connection type. So by reading the book, you'll then identify for yourself, okay, this is what it's like to be in a relationship with me. That's called external self-awareness. Now, external self-awareness is the hardest type of awareness to get and to have, because how do you ever know what someone else thinks of you or what it's like to be around you? I mean, do you get it through social media likes? Do you get it by asking your loved ones what they think of you? I think it's going to depend on their mood that day. Sometimes they'll say, well, I think you're annoying, or I think you're fantastic. It's hard to get self-awareness. And, we try and do it through leadership 360s, through asking people how useful are those things. And it's also through someone else's lens. So I thought to myself, what if I could design the equivalent of a psychological mirror? So we have physical mirrors where we get to see what our hair looks like, or we get to see if they've got something in our teeth. Fantastic. What if we could have the same mirror for the way that we connect with people, to give us some insight into what it's like to be in a team with us, and then for leaders to be able to profile people and say, right, okay, well, I've got one person here who's a light type, really high frequency, extroverted, high intensity, connects through talking. I mean, I've had feedback from people saying, you just saved me 12 weeks of meetings, because we do get this information from people, but it takes a long time. We have to meet with them. We have to talk to them. It's trial and error. We've got to ask them questions. And in fact, I was speaking with a room full of leaders yesterday, and I said, if you could have one leadership challenge that was addressed for you, that was fixed, what would it be? And someone said, oh, I wish I could just have an instant snapshot of someone's personality type at the very beginning. And that's what I'm trying to provide in connection types. So there's 17 different connection types, but 5 primary ones, all based on your frequency, so how much connection you like, and your intensity, so what type of connection you like. And based on those 2 results for frequency and intensity, you then are given your connection type.
So it's an interesting. So somebody said to me, and I know pretty much the answer myself, but I think people will be asking this question. So we said, what's the difference between this and a Myers-Briggs or a DISC, or those things that have been around? So it'd be interesting for you to tell us why this is different to those.
Yeah, and that's something that I was really strongly considering at the start, because I didn't want to create something that already existed. There's 2 different types of indicators. There's type indicators and life indicators. Now, a type indicator is who you are. That's a given trait that will stay with you for the rest of your life. So if you think about the big 5 personality traits, how open someone is, how conscientious someone is, how introverted or extroverted someone is, those things are pretty fixed through time. You don't tend to meet children who are really, really, really shy and introverted, who like being on their own, who turn into adults that are highly extroverted and social. So that's a type indicator. A life indicator is just a snapshot of where you are at a moment in time in your life. And that's what this is. So I wanted people to be able to, and in fact, you get 2 results when you take this assessment. One result is, how are you currently connecting in your current environment? And the second result is, how would you like to be connecting? So I'm actually more interested in the gap that this assessment reveals between what your environment is asking you to do and what you'd prefer to be doing. If there's a small gap, fantastic. Go for your life, because it means that your connection, your needs are being met by your environment. If there's a very large gap, you're more likely to be starting to see some mental and physical health repercussions of having to do so much work to compensate in your environment. And I'll give you an example. Imagine someone who's actually quite introverted, likes their own company, working in sales. Constant conversations every single day, or media like yourself.
Yeah.
That kind of talking, they would be so drained at the end of the day. So for anyone wondering, well, I don't know if my connection needs are met by my environment, how do you feel at the end of the day? Now, we all know that there's the negative drained feeling, or the exhausted because I just gave it everything today. Of course, we're all tired at the end of the day. Hopefully you are. Hopefully you've given it all. But there's the toxic feeling of drain, and the great, I don't know about anyone else, I like feeling tired at the end of it. I sort of like feeling like, oh, I did a lot. Yeah. So I think it's just about developing that external self-awareness, working out whether your environment is supporting you. And then I work with leaders to ascertain. I'll give you some great feedback from a leader last year. And she said, look, before I took this profile and did this work, I thought to myself that I had to be a certain type of leader, because that's what leaders are supposed to be like. There's an archetype of a leader, and I needed to be part of that textbook, all of those lists. But when I took the profile and I saw the gap of what I could miss, then I started asking different questions. Maybe I can shape my environment to support my challenges or my weaknesses. Maybe I can delegate some of those tasks that I thought a leader should be doing, but aren't really part of my great skill set. So it's just a mirror of a point in time that allows you to reflect on, how's my environment supporting the way that I like to connect, and how can I shape my environment to get that gap very small.
So all of those things that we've just been talking about all play into what I hear you talk about quite often, is emotional literacy.
Mm.
And so all of those threads sort of come towards that. But I think it'd be really interesting for you to talk a little bit about that before we finish the cast up, because to me that's that binding thing around what I've heard and read from you, is that emotional literacy.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for like so thoughtfully and artfully putting together all the strands of my work, because I think you do it better than I do. The trajectory of the interview has almost been good for me to understand my work.
Thank you.
But I think emotional literacy is in the same way that we're encouraged to have financial literacy. You know, do you know about your bank accounts or your super, and is it working for you? All of us have complex relationships in our lives, and the research says that our relationships are the greatest indicator of our mental and physical health. I've said that before. So, with that in mind, probably the most important skill set we'll ever have is the ability to read ourselves and other people in relationships. And I think a lot of us are very simplistic when it comes to our emotions. So, meaning our literacy is at a very basic level, and it's not because we're not advanced in any way. It's because we haven't been taught about these skills.
Yeah.
So what we tend to do is we say, oh, I felt really flat today, or I felt depressed on the weekend, or I just don't feel like myself. We've got these phrases for our emotions that aren't really that deep. And I would love people to be able to identify our needs for belonging or our experiences of loneliness. See, I'd love people to be so granular about their emotional experience to say, well, actually, I felt a collective loneliness on the weekend. Because there's 3 types of loneliness. One's intimate loneliness for an intimate partner. One is social loneliness, which is loneliness when we don't have friends or network. Collective loneliness is just being out in the world, going to the dog park, going to the shops. That's what we all felt during COVID. So I'd love for someone to say, yeah, look, I had a great Friday, but then on Saturday, I just really felt that social loneliness come over me. And so then what I did was I called my friends, or I went to the club, or I got out there, I went to the beach, something to address that loneliness. Because what we tend to do is we go, I feel flat, I'm just going to stay at home, I can't be bothered to see. And so I think emotional literacy can help you make different decisions to support your belonging.
I think it's a really important theme, and why I drew those together like that. I saw you do a talk called "Read and Lead the Room," I think, and it struck me that everything you've just talked about and those things. If you can bring them together in that thread of emotional literacy, you can actually read the room and you can lead the room at the same time.
And some people don't want to lead the room. It's
Right.
also about that as well, reading yourself to say, I know what my role in the team is. And but then having said that, I think everyone leads in different ways. Even if you're trying to keep the team on track through data and analytics, that's a form of leadership. Absolutely. So finding your form of leadership, and the connection type can identify that for you, what your leadership style is, and using that to be curious about your relationships, even at work. And I've got to say that a lot of people who are overwhelmed by emotional literacy and all this stuff, I see it where they'll just say, go to HR, go to the employee assistance program, go to the EAP, I think you need to see a psychologist. There's a real tendency now to refer, because the leader's like, alarm, someone's having emotions. And I'd love people to just 10% more. I don't want someone to become, the leader is not the psychologist or the therapist, although they might feel like that at some points. But it's okay to say to people that you work with, how are you going at the moment? Like, how are you feeling? You all right? And to be able to hear the answer to that question as well. I think we just need leaders to have a little bit more. If we develop our own emotional literacy, if I can sit in my own pain and vulnerability and fear, then I can hear yours. So we start with our own emotional literacy and then start developing relationships with people at work that aren't just transactional. The reason I encourage people to do that, the output is that people are more likely to want to stay working there because they feel like they're part of a team that's more than just them playing a role. They are able to bring their whole selves to work.
if you're listening to that, I hope you got something out of this. Really, look, we're really close to the end of our time, and I'll thank you for the time that you've spent with us, Ali. How can people get involved? How can people touch base with you? The tool, Aleti. How can they get involved with that?
Sure. So I've got my website, which is alitylife.com, ALITY life.com, and also my personal website, which is awalker.co. So just, I mean, if you just Google Ali Walker, I'm sure they will come up. But also I often produce videos and put them on my social media, Dr. Ali Walker on Facebook and Instagram, and find me on LinkedIn. I mean, there's books and there's talks and there's lots of ways that we can connect. But yes, I'm sure it's easy to find me.
And don't hesitate to drop anything in the comments if you've got questions or you'd like to just comment on this in the comments. It's been fantastic having you on. If you're watching this, don't forget, we've got our remote community. Go to remoteaf.co, click the community button, join us. You'll see a lot more of these types of things and interact with a lot of different people. Ali, it's been fantastic having you on all the remote things today. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tony. Thanks for having me.